Welcome to episode 580 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Hilton, and joining me today to talk about our feelings. That's what we're talking about today, our feelings. And yeah, I'm going to get a little bit of tactic talk in here too. I have to, because that's what makes me feel better. But here we are, Rafa.
A big sigh. That's the only thing that I want to say right now. It's another European disaster class night, however you want to call it. The Xavi era is over, and I got a lot of things to say. So I know you want to talk tactics, and I know we'll eventually get to that. But I think we got to talk about a few other things before we get to the nitty-gritty and the X's and O's.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that we could go with this based on, I think, a starting point of the European narrative and Barcelona exercising those European demons. Because that's obviously, I think, what the feeling, the emotional reaction is that Barcelona are stuck in the same place because they cannot exercise those European demons. And I kind of said two different versions of the same thing yesterday, where I had agreed with Tony Juan Martí of Siempre Positivo about how the 8-2 really did feel like the whole Roma and Liverpool. It felt like this era of now Barcelona is kind of this mediocre team in Europe, and that's what they became, where it became mediocre expectations for this team, where prior to 8-2, the expectation was that Barcelona was always going to get to the semifinal, that Barcelona was always going to, even though Rome and Liverpool had happened, right? Because obviously those are, terrible memories and heartbreaking things. The feeling was that Barcelona were upset in those games and that they were the better side, where you look back at the most recent seasons, going back to Liverpool, right? 2020, Bayern Munich 8-2, and then 2021, PSG were just better. And then obviously Barca missed the knockouts, both 2022 and 2023. They get knocked out in the group stage. So this season, just getting to the quarterfinal, felt like, as we know, financially, they bridged that expectation. And now, hopefully, because they even made the quarterfinal, they can, big picture here, hopefully register Vitor Roque. But beside even making other signings, and exactly, I mean, that is the situation that Barca's in, and we can brush our head and be frustrated, and it is frustrating. Like I looked at the numbers yesterday, and people, as fast as I got my match review out, because it was actually my third fastest, I think, of the year, and yet people just didn't want to watch it, and they were just, it's heartbreak. That's what it is. And going back to the trophy, Barcelona has had nothing but real heartbreak in Europe, other than what I had said 2017 was the exception, because even though Juventus beat them, Barcelona kind of limped into that space, and Juventus were just kind of on form. It was an ugly tie, and I don't feel like Barcelona were humiliated or embarrassed at all. But every one of the other situations I'm mentioning in Europe, it just makes me question this idea, and I want you to answer this. Is the only way that Barcelona are going to exercise these Champions League demons is if they actually win the trophy? Or is the way that they can just be outplayed, and then it's not this whole humiliating or embarrassing thing? Because I think fans do expect them to be at the very top and fighting for that trophy. Like even the Real Madrid-Man City result from today, right? Are Man City the ones who are embarrassed and humiliated? I mean, maybe I think they're the better side over the course of that tie, and yet they wound up having to come from behind to tie it up 4-4, and they should have had a goal in extra time, but the game's totally slowed down. They couldn't get through it. Then they lose on PKs. So in Europe, the better team doesn't always win. But I think for Barca, my initial reaction is that we're going to spend a week being like, they were humiliated and embarrassed. Like Barca were humiliated and embarrassed. And if they weren't humiliated and embarrassed and just lost 3-1 and in that game or whatever, if they lost 3-1 and they, were toe for toe, but Mbappe went nuts and Dembele scored 2 from outside the box, whatever, and it's not so humiliating, does that make this any better?
The thing is, I think I want to try to explain myself as best as I can. To answer your question, I don't necessarily think to exercise those demons we don't necessarily have to win the Champions League. Well, we definitely have to play better. And what I mean play better, I've said it in this podcast before. I think during the group stage, we were lucky that we were in a group. We were in the group that we were, because I don't think we played well, especially like away games. I think we were outclassed by Porto away and home during that first half. Against Napoli, it was just a matter of who sucked the least, in my opinion, because they were pretty much in the same situation as we were. And this tie, like I've been very critical the entire season. I don't think Xavi is the right coach. I don't think he's shown throughout his entire tenure enough evolution in the game. But I think it's so hard for me to analyze how this result came about because of the red card. Yes, PSG during those first 10 minutes, they were by far the better side. They looked like Barcelona in those first 10 minutes. We couldn't do absolutely anything. They had the ball. They were pressing high. We couldn't get out of the back. I know that, but we will never know if that would have been those 10 minutes and then hey, it's a switch. Lamine Yamal, it was counter-attack-ish. We score that goal, and then we start playing better. We'll never know because then minute 30, obviously, that red card just puts an asterisk on everything. And then you're like, it's like salmon. You're swimming against the current for 60 minutes. And kudos to Luis Enrique and to PSG because they were, we say in Spanish, madurar. They didn't panic. They were like, okay, we are a man up, but they were playing to their strengths, opening the pitch, opening Barcola, Dembele, switching the ball from side to side because eventually they knew in one of those plays, they were gonna find somebody where there was Dembele with Hakimi overlapping on that right side, and that's what they kept doing. That's how the first goal came about. Obviously, Cancelo asleep and Dembele. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. A guy that literally had scored one freaking goal in the entire season before the Barcelona tie, and lo and behold, it's written in the stars. He scores those type of goals against us. Then the penalty. I mean, it's as reckless as you can get. Dembele ain't going anywhere. Yes, he's inside the box on top of that. So I don't know what Cancelo was thinking. And then the third goal, I can't say anything about that because it's a 10-man Barcelona trying to tie the game, just throwing everybody upward. And then it reminded me a little bit about that Fernando Torres goal, Chelsea 2012. Barcelona were just trying to score a goal, and then obviously you get caught on the counter, and then it's a bunch of rebounds. Ter Stegen makes 2 great saves, and then Koundé just decides to clear/pass the ball to his national team teammate, and then it's hard to analyze because then I don't want to be critical of Araujo overall, but it's obvious that he made an error that cost us the tie. But he's our best defender, and he was throughout this entire tie as well. Obviously, Kouarsi has been completely amazing, but Araujo is our best defender, and yeah, it's a matter of like, yes, we all know he knows. Nobody has to tell Araujo that he's the main reason we're out. He knows that, but then again, with what face do we critique the best defender of Barcelona for the past 2-3 years? So it's like, it's a rough situation.
Yeah, once again, I'm kind of stuck between two minds here about trying to, talk about tactics after the red card because it dictated everything, and then all the things that had happened beforehand. And in the case of Araujo, this does bring up the tactics a little bit here because the key to this whole game was him, for better or worse. The first goal for Barcelona comes because he's completely unmarked by PSG. He was the free man. Kouarsi, Cancelo, and Koundé were all man-marked quite tightly, as were De Jong and Gundogan and Pedri in the midfield. I actually did think that Xavi made the right choice to have Gundogan stay farther forward and to have De Jong and Pedri as that double pivot. That made sense to me because, again, Lamine Yamal was going to need some service that he didn't necessarily get in that first game. And so having Gundogan closer to him, that's kind of what leads to that first goal anyway. Barcelona are able to press, they get the ball back, they move things around, and near their own half, PSG sit off Araujo, let him be the free man, and he plays a really good ball to Lamine Yamal, and then obviously the kid does the rest and has a great European moment. But that is also what leads to the goal happening, because that mistake by Araujo on the pass, now you're going right down the other way. And it is frustrating because Luis Enrique and PSG kind of played a long game. And the other thing I would say, too, about the bigger picture and where my frustration lies is that, like watching the Barça Femení, but in the inverse when it's the Barça Femení, PSG, it felt inevitable. And I think that's what was so crushing about it. That's what's so humiliating about that kind of loss, because even down 10 men, they still, that being Barcelona, were up 4-2 on aggregate. And then I look at the rest of that game, and yes, of course, as you said, Araujo knows it was all on him. He was either going to win Barcelona that game, which he got the first goal, or he was going to lose that game if he, got the red card, which it's what happens. Like Gundogan even said after the game, I'm going to reference Gundogan here in our next segment coming up, but he referenced that if it's a foul, then it's a foul and it's a red card in that situation. And he would have preferred if Araujo had let him play through, but Araujo knows that. Everybody knows that. My bigger issues is that, that whole second half, how inevitable and soul crushing and just how much of a slow burn it was, because it seemed like Barcelona in that 4-4-1 with Lewandowski being the only outlet out, they didn't really have a plan. They didn't really have a game plan other than just, pinging it long to him, sure. Because in that instance, and thinking back to it, I had said, and I think others agreed with me, I would have put on Ferran Torres earlier in that game. Now, some said, why would you take off Lamine Yamal? Because he would be the outlet instead of Lewandowski. But you're always going to keep your number 9, your big guy, on, because especially for set pieces, you're going to keep him, because if you're going to get a goal or another goal, it might come on a set piece off a corner or some kind of fortunate thing where Lewandowski needs just a moment, where Lamine Yamal, if he's not getting any service on the wing and he has to defend the whole time. But then I think I would have taken off, instead of Lamine Yamal, I would have taken off Rafinha for Ferran Torres, because as good a form that Rafinha had been in, he just scored the goal. Rafinha gets his runs in behind, and you can play him in behind. But if he's having to defend on that left side, especially to help with Dembele when you're down a man, then he physically can't do much, because he's not going to be able to get on the ball in transition on the counter and then get out and go with it. And I think he actually had 1 or 2 moments. I say all that in principle, but he also still had 1 or 2 moments in that second half. That said, the stat I think is most damning is in that second quarter, or second half, I should say, no Barcelona field player, so only Ter Stegen, no Barcelona field player gave more than 4 passes to one teammate. There were no partnerships. So I think the bigger, we'll say, worrisome extrapolation I take from that is that Barcelona had a bit of adversity, because yes, you have the strike force of Dembele, Barcola, and Mbappe, but they still played 23% of their passes were long passes, because again, you get a red card, you're down, which is the highest figure of the whole season. And no player in the outfield gave more passes than Ter Stegen. That's worrisome. And then only 121 passes were in the third of PSG, which was almost, I think, 1.5 that amount, or double that against Cadiz, of course. And 44 of those were even long. And so they barely counted because they didn't amount to multiple passing sequences. So yes, Barcelona went down a man, but the lack of control that we've now been talking about since what? Quique Setien, right? Like that lack of control that Barcelona has, that immediately brings up big questions about De Jong and about Pedri. And I think one of the really interesting debates that I see is that I'm not even saying to pick a side, but the whole idea that Barcelona need to sell one of their big dogs. And I've said before, with De Jong's contract, I can't imagine it's going to be him. But in a perfect world, not a perfect world, but in a perfect world to solve a problem, if you have to decide between Araujo, De Jong, and Pedri, I mean, I guess we can let everybody debate that, because Pedri and De Jong is not a partnership that works, and Gabi is the starter, right? If we're ranking those three at the end of this season with the first half that Gabi had and his importance to Barca, it's Gabi who works best around him. Then you have to figure out, is it De Jong or is Pedri? But because of De Jong's contract, is Pedri the odd man out here? Because, I mean, he's still the only guy that could keep ball retention. He kept the ball, he had more touches for Barcelona in the middle of the field than any of the other midfielders. And he was the guy that was kind of being relied on to keep retention of that ball, because Gundogan was being forced to push forward. And if Barcelona were going to get out of any trouble, it had to be Gundogan to support Lewandowski on that right side. So they're just big questions, big problems that I don't know how you solve with the personnel that Barcelona has.
I think Xavi handled this the same way. I know I wasn't here for after the first leg, but after the first leg, during the first leg, I mean, Luis Enrique made tactical changes. He obviously also brought in Barcola during halftime. Luis Enrique was winning the X's and O's battle. Then, around what, minute 60, 65, whatever, Xavi made changes, and they were good changes, and he won the X's and O's battle. But in this game, it seems that Xavi got everything wrong after the Araujo red card. And I know that's harsh because at the end of the day, yeah, like we're talking about your team being a man down. But it's just one thing that I don't understand. Like, I know he was good during in the first game. He was really good at hold up play and whatnot. But when you're a man down, you're gonna be defending most of the time. Let's be honest. Lewandowski, he's old, he's slow. Teams know that. So what I don't understand, or I'm having a little bit of a hard time comprehending, is the opposing team knows Lewandowski is not going to pose any threat whatsoever on the counter with speed, I mean. So I'm not saying that Lewandowski should have been the first sub after Araujo's red card. But what I mean is, you know that it's either a set piece or a counter attack with quick players. You had to take out Lamine Yamal, so that's out of the question. But let's say around minute 60, 65, 70, whatever that may be. I don't remember exactly. I'm so like mentally drained that I don't even remember if Lewandowski, like, was he subbed out? Did he play at the literally the end, or did he play the 90 minutes? But whatever. The point that I'm trying to make is, whether it's Ferran or whether it's maybe Vitor Roque in the final 50 minutes, like, you got to do something. Think outside the box, because you need speed. You know you're going to be defending for your life more for the next 60 minutes. So try and make something out, like even like take a midfielder out. I don't know. Do something different, because you're going to have to hit PSG on the counter with fast players. Because what? You're going to throw a long ball to Lewandowski, like Ter Stegen's going to do that. He's going to hold it. Yeah, he's going to do a good job at that. But then what options does he have? Because everybody else is defending. Rafinha is literally, his lung is coming through his mouth because he's defending and then trying to like do something. So Lewandowski has no outlet. Everybody knows that. So you got Lucas Hernandez and company, just and Marquinhos suffocating Lewandowski because he doesn't have anybody to play the ball to. And it's not like Lewandowski is Mbappe or Haaland, that he's gonna, like, you can give him a pass to the space and he's gonna run into it and maybe score. So I think Xavi in that aspect, and I'm not even talking about him getting a red card, like it to me that's a little bit more of a like analogy of like how like this whole situation sadly has gotten the better of Xavi mentally, physically, tactically, however you want to put it, because you can't, like, to me, that's just insane that you would lose your cool in that way. And obviously we know Xavi has a track record of losing his cool, but I think the past few months has like made Xavi, like, he lost the plot. I'm sorry to admit it, but he lost the plot a while ago.
It's so hard for me to agree with that, though, because Barcelona came into this match on a 12-game unbeaten streak. And I mean, with good quality wins over Atletico Madrid. And I know you said that it was a race at the bottom against Napoli, but it wasn't. Like, Osimhen had to be defended well. And I think even though certain players struggled, like, I don't want to downplay just how amazing Cubarsí has been in this last month, or just how
he's
amazing
been great.
Yes, have been great. Like, individually, I think Barcelona have had, I mean, even Lewandowski has had, I've said it, he's had a good month. Like, he's been just fine for almost 2 months now, actually, like, on this unbeaten streak. Since, basically, Xavi's right. Since he announced he was leaving, Barcelona have been good. Like, they've been a quality side that has been playing quality football up with anybody, right? And I think because it all went wrong, I mean, we can even relitigate the what ifs, that if Balde was healthy, I think Cancelo still starts this match, because, again, going forward, 11-11, when Cancelo has help, right? When he has that center back to slide over to help him with Dembele and come in behind for him, or he has De Jong who doesn't have to cover so much space, because even in the first 10 minutes, one of the big keys that Luis Enrique was doing is he was playing and bringing Vitinha out wide as well as Zaire Emery, and that meant De Jong and Pedri were getting split a bit farther. And because Mbappe had started in the middle, there was a central channel to have Mbappe that they were going to try to have him run on the entire time. So that was one of the big major tactical differences that we were going to see in that game that, may have been able to bear fruit. But once PSG is down 4-2 at that point, I still think they get one or two back, but does Barca have another one in them? Like my prediction before the game was 2-2 because I did think that there were obviously going to be goals coming. But 11-11, I think you with Balde out and with Alonso being, I mean, again, that's a transfer thing that you can say Barca were forced to do, and maybe they shouldn't have done it at all because it's better to have nobody than Alonso. Because if you can't trust him, right? Same with Romeo, I'll get to that in a second. But if you can't trust those guys in the Champions League in the quarterfinals, why are they in your squad? Like, why do you go for them originally? Do you think that you're gonna, you know what I mean? Like, what's the chances you're gonna trust them in those moments? So with Balde's injury, I would have taken off Cancelo for Balde at that instance. Again, I think Cancelo still starts because he's I would say he's just a more well-rounded and important to the way that Barcelona want to play with the ball. But Balde is a better defensive left back. And in that circumstance, you would have liked to have Balde's speed, or you even take Cancelo off and you move Rafinha back to speak him out outside of the box. Then you put Rafinha at left back. But Xavi also hasn't really wanted to shake things up too much and try something too crazy other than like Hector Fort play left back instead of right back, right? Like just play that kind of thing, or Rafinha play on the left wing instead of the right wing and try to have him work into that. That's kind of his thinking outside the box. They're throwing a bunch of midfielders on with Fermin Lopez, because Fermin Lopez actually ended that game at left back, by the way. Just throwing that out there. That it was actually, because on the fourth goal, as you mentioned, when Mbappe had that deflection, the three defenders, if you will, were Fermin Lopez, Kubarsi, and Koundé on the counter. So it was a 4-on-3 against Barca. And what are you going to do about that? But yeah, and then Xavi, to go back to that point about the red card, I don't think he's lost the plot, but I do think that he is leaving because he's admitted that at this point in his life or his career, or whatever it is, this job is a bit too big for him of where he's at. So I don't know exactly what that means. I leave that very ambiguous, but I think his leaving and continued defiance of saying I'm leaving, because especially after this result, if Laporta was, going out, was it the day before, he walked out across the whole field, and it was a pretty serious conversation, probably to say, hey, Xavi, can you stay? I think at this point, Xavi, who was already 95% definitely out the door, and maybe there was a chance he was going to be convinced to come back. Now he's definitely not coming back. And I think my frustration and sadness for him is that everybody wanted him to succeed. Everybody wanted him to succeed. And I think so many would take him over so many other managers. Like every time I talk to somebody outside of the club or within the club about managers, everyone's like, well, I don't trust that pick. I don't trust that pick. I don't trust that pick. So then who'd you pick? Like if Xavi decides to stay, I think it's almost something that people would accept, even though, we don't need to say that he is, that the job is, we'll say, too much for him, because he's saying it's too much for him and he's trying to leave and he's trying to say, hey, I want to stay a legend. I love you guys. I love this club, but this isn't working for me. And I think the red card was a microcosm of that, Xavi, you're more important on the sideline than up in the stands. Like it would be helpful if you as a manager were on the sideline there, but he couldn't control his temper and it took him out of the game. And I think that's really frustrating, because that kind of leads me to this next conversation I want to have, which kind of takes Xavi's post-game comments about the red card and about the referee. And it's a complete juxtaposition with Gundogan's comments, where instead of talking about the referee at all, he talked about the maturity of his teammates, having better situational IQ, the individual mistakes that were made, without calling out any names. And I think there's something really telling about the way that Xavi spoke after this game to the way that Gundogan spoke after this game, to a point where you go, well, if everybody, including, going all the way up the system at Barcelona, if everybody in that locker room had the mentality of Gundogan, Barcelona probably, do they win that game? Like, you know what I mean? Like, do they have the individual talent to win that game? Or is this all a mentality thing? Or do they have a better chance if the mentality is better after the red card? It seems to me that there's a victim mentality throughout Barcelona that even permeates the fan base and people who listen to you and I. And I think, I'm not saying that Xavi is the victim, but I'm saying is like, there's something about accountability that I respect in sports. And I think, I hope that the club would say, well, Xavi's accountable to this because he's leaving. So we as a club, how are we going to be accountable to this? Are we accountable to this by not spending any money? Are we accountable to this by, making XYZ a transfer or making a transfer that fans don't necessarily want to make, right? Like, how are we going to solve our problems?
Well, as far as that goes, I think for the most part, Xavi as a coach, has zero accountability for the most part. Like, I listened to most of his post-match press conferences, and to me, it seems like Xavi, he says some things that you like, wait, what? Like, Xavi, what game did you watch? Like, the rest of the world probably doesn't agree with your point of view about X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be. I'm not using any specific example, but I think for the most part, Xavi has games, a lot of games that we play like trash. And then you see Xavi come out during the press conference and be like, well, we didn't play that. We actually played. Well, I'm satisfied with the team. Whether that's reverse psychology, whether inside the locker room he admits that they play like trash and eats his players, I don't know. So I'm trying to judge Xavi by face value, that what he's saying in the press conference is what he actually thinks. Because I have
him leaving is him being accountable to like the big picture. Because I agree with you with the press conferences. Like he does go after the referees, just in unnecessary ways. When Barcelona plays poorly over 90 minutes and doesn't control a game, totally agree with that. But like, do you think him leaving is a show of that bigger accountability?
Yes, in that aspect, yeah. Because the same way, like that's why I think I consider myself like, when I have to criticize Xavi, I do it. When I have to defend him, I do. And thank you for bringing that up, because the same way that I'm saying, I don't think tactically, for the most part, after games, Xavi has any accountability, recognizing that we play like trash for the most part, and then he tries to like cover up and whatnot. I can agree with you that him leaving is in some sort of way, whether he wants to explicitly say it or not, a form of accountability, because I think deep down he knows that when all is settled, and I don't think he's going to say it publicly anytime soon, but he will admit eventually, whether it's 10, 15, 20 years, that he wasn't ready for the job, for the Barcelona job this first time around. And I'm saying this first time around because hopefully he can come back in a few years after he's coached, I don't know where, and then be able to like rinse a little bit. Yes, some people are going to say, well, he won the league and the Super Copa, but if you take the macro, I don't think it's been great for Xavi. And I think he himself, with his wife and like close ones, his brother and whatnot, I think he will admit that it was abrumador. I don't know how you say that in English. Like the first time around, it got the best of him for the most part. And I think whether it's tactically, dealing with the press, like the pressure of managing Barcelona, him being an idol as a player, and then people expecting that to translate as a manager. So I do think, even though he hasn't said it explicitly, I think him realizing, hey, I'm sorry, I like this got the better of me. I'm not ready for this yet, and I can't do another year of this, because I'm sorry. I gotta leave the house, get more experience, and then hopefully in the future, who knows what the future holds, come back with a more experienced coach with a better economical situation, and then maybe the story will be different.
Yeah, I find that it's Barcelona, in terms of the whole mythos of who's managing and who these characters are that take charge of the club. I think there's this referendum that it's going to always happen, that's going to continue to happen, that has been a part of this club for decades and decades and decades, that who is the best man to lead this job? In what voice is it, right? Who is the best manager at Barcelona ever?
Messi?
No, best manager.
Oh, Guardiola.
Yeah, or Cruyff. I mean, it's
yes,
probably
one of the two.
Yeah, Guardiola, then Cruyff, certainly. And then quickly, it's Lucho. Rinus Michels was a very accomplished, even though he didn't do it with winning at Barcelona. Rijkaard has some. He has his detractors. he did a little bit of winning. Valverde also did his winning as well. But it's hard to say when you're talking. Then I'll just throw out my list here. Yeah, Guardiola and Cruyff definitely best, and Luis Enrique and Heleno Herrera was an outside voice and had a falling out with the board and wound up leaving and winds up winning Champions League with Inter with the Spanish Luis Suarez. And then you have other ones like Dowsick, who was brought in by Kubala because he was his brother-in-law. And of course, Louis van Gaal wasn't the best situation. Brian Robson was better elsewhere, but what a miraculous season he had, right, with Brazilian Ronaldo. And then, you're talking Valverde and Rijkaard. And so in terms of replacing Xavi, I think there will be no matter what. It's an odd thing because this conversation was going to come, but now this feels like in the middle of April with El Clásico, which is going to be our last segment. We'll preview that in a second, unfortunately. But now we're having this referendum already about like the roads that Barcelona can go down, because it is going to be really easy, unfortunately, really easy with a young, promising squad that Barca has, and with a team in theory who is 2 years away, as I've talked about many times on the show, with the renovation of the Camp Nou, as well as the ages of Gavi and hopefully Balde and, of course, Lamine Yamal and Kubarsi and who knows, Fort and Vitor Roque and Mark Gu, and as I've mentioned, maybe Bernal and maybe Gu Fernandez, and this amazing generation that's coming through that's cheap, by the way, because that's an important part of the young players I'm mentioning. All of them are either on the books, and Vitor Roque being the one example, the one exception to that. So all of those young players coming through, and there's a lot of promise for this club with the way that the squad could be built in the next 3 to 5 years. But there are decisions that are going to be made now, even this summer, that are going to pay potentially huge dividends or throw this plan off for another year or two. Not in terms of like signing a huge player that flops or whatever. Barca don't have the ability to do that. But if they pick the wrong man to guide this ship, like let's say they pick a manager that doesn't really mess with Lamine Yamal or take something away from him, or is like, Kubarsi is 17, I don't trust him, right? And then they have a manager that doesn't see it. But what if they just promote from within and go, Rafa Marquez, you're the guy? Well, because you're the cheapest, sure, right? And I said it last week, I'll say it again now, especially after this. You're going to see more and more rumblings about Rafa Marquez because no other guy is the guy. And I think if there was a guy, you'd already know who that is. And I think Barcelona at this point, Laporta is very good with picking his guys. That's what he does. He trusts the people who he rode with, and Rafa Marquez is one of his guys. He got rid of Garcia Pimienta to ride with Rafa Marquez. So
Mundo Deportivo's cover tonight is Xavi or Rafa Marquez.
There you go. So, yeah, there you go. I didn't even, I don't necessarily read Mundo Deportivo all the time. Yeah. I pick up the aggregations of it. But I think some people wisely said, well, if it's Rafa Marquez, could he be the stopgap for Jurgen Klopp in 2025? But now you're dreaming a little bit too much already. So the concern is that Barcelona does make the wrong pick, does put the wrong man in charge, but it's also that pie in the sky world where, Guardiola, people are always going back to that. Guardiola was, coming from the B team, he was an unknown and it all worked out. But it just, you'd never know. It's so dumb because the future we can't tell. So you never know what the outlier is, because right now it feels like Guardiola's the outlier. He's one of the greatest managers of all time. Like I just went through Barcelona's whole history of their greatest managers, going all the way back to even Jack Greenwell in like the 20s. So you could go through Barca's history and he's number one, and he's one of the greatest managers. He's probably the number one guy in the 21st century, right? It's probably him. So it's just so hard to be able to predict if you're going to get it right or wrong. And yeah, it's a genius move if the guy from inside the house winds up working out. But Barcelona rely on that quite a bit. But they also
my worry with whoever the new coach ends up being is more. It has more to do with what you said about these bright young players that have come out this season, Kubarsi, Lamine Yamal, and that next coach not taking away anything from them. But that's the only, and I'm making air quotes for people only listening to this. That's the only thing that worries me, because at worst, whoever comes in, I don't think, I'm sorry, but I think Xavi has been really bad tactically for the most. Like, this team hasn't played according to what you would think, or what Xavi himself has said he wants the team to play. So I'm looking at it this way, like the glass half full. Like, whoever comes in, at worst, he's going to do what Xavi did, which is not play a good brand of football. And to me, I'm excited about having a new coach. If that ends up being Rafa Marquez, I may regret saying this tonight. But I am excited. I'm like, Xavi, like, thanks for everything, but it's time for you to go. Like, whoever ends up being the coach, like, at worst, he's going to be what? The same as Xavi? Tactically, for the most part? But, the only thing that I'm worried about is what you said. Like, Kubarsi has everything, like, in his repertoire to be the Barcelona's next center back for the next 15 years. That's how young he is. Same with Lamine Yamal, the right winger. So, whoever comes in, I agree with what you said. Like, there has to be a consensus. Hey, do you trust? Like, do you trust Kubarsi? Do you trust Lamine Yamal? Yes, 1000%. Then perfect. That's good. And then him not taking anything away from those players that made them burst out this season. And then the rest, I'm not worried about it because what I said, it's what's the worst thing that can happen? They're gonna be in quote unquote as bad as Xavi tactically. I'm willing to take the risk because this clearly with Xavi wasn't working.
I don't think any manager can succeed without a pivot. And I don't know how Barcelona Financial is going to do that. I've talked about many times, so you can make your wish list, but unless Barcelona solve that pivot problem quickly, and it could be something that there is somebody out there who has only watched De Jong footage for the last 5 years. Maybe there's some manager out there who's like, man, when I get my hands on De Jong and they unlock something and we see something that we know isn't there, but yet a manager might see something that no other manager.
Pep Guardiola.
Well, I mean, who knows what Pep Guardiola would do with De Jong, but unless they can solve that problem in terms of personnel, I don't back any manager to be able to have Barcelona play. And when I say Barcelona play a certain way, I mean with control. I mean when Barcelona are up 2-0 in a game or get up 2, or when they're up 1-0 and you get the sense, oh, Barcelona are closer to their second than the other team are to their first, and they put teams away in the 40th minute and they feel inevitable the way that the Femení team does. And that's obviously a huge talent disparity, by the way. Like the Femení are just so much better than their opponents so often that it's a talent disparity. But Barcelona also kind of have a talent disparity as well. Like they have the best academy in the world. And this is a safe space to say that, but I also say that like that Lamine Yamal and Pau Cubarsí were the two youngest players to ever play in a quarterfinal or start a quarterfinal of a Champions League. So like, yeah, I'm going to say La Masia is the best academy in the world until two players break that record in the starting 11. So I'm not here to debate that. Of course, if you're listening this far into this show, then you agree with me. But the point is, like, it's our title to lose in terms of the academy. But with the academy as kind of a weapon to be used for the club and players wanting to live in Barcelona and take their newborn babies and their beautiful wives to Barcelona and live in the city. And yes, they're now they're being asked to take a pay cut. And unless you're Lewandowski, they have to fit in a certain salary structure. That's true. But with the Camp Nou getting renovated, as long as that opens its doors and tourism is booming and renovation, it goes well, Barcelona will be out of this malaise in the next 5 years. And I know that feels like forever, but also like in a matter of time that we're talking about, 5 years ago, right? The world had not been into a global pandemic, but it was about to be, right? Like it was about to be. And, Ernesto Valverde 5 years ago was just losing to Liverpool. Like that was just 5 years ago. And I remember doing that. I remember having the postmortem with Frances and all the emotions of what went into that. And in footballing terms, it's not that long, right? Like it's not that long because Pedri is still like 21, 22, and he took part in some of that stuff. So, I mean, in football terms, yeah, things change quickly, but, in 3 to 5 years, the club should be fine with the Camp Nou renovation and everything. You do have to trust that the power of this club and the marketing of this club and about rising all ships, that I hate Real Madrid to my very core, but also those two teams put on this weekend, El Clásico, final segment here, they put on the biggest show arguably in the world. Like the eyes of the world are always on El Clásico, whether or not Barcelona are trash or, usually Real Madrid come into it in a certain way and Barcelona are the ones that have to be on top. But to go just to sum up the point about the Barca DNA thing, it's like to everybody's point, this Barcelona team does not control a match. And there's a Barcelona way, if you will, of playing. And that inevitability, I think that's what I always say when I say, how do I want my Barcelona to play? It's that, sure, I mean, having your signed attackers, your Ronaldinhos, hopefully your Vitor Roques, or you bring it up from the academy and your Messis or your Lamine Yamals or whoever, and you get those stars that put in the goals and they want to play in Barcelona, great. But then the rest of your team is built through control. And everybody else kind of just supports the attackers, and they're technically better than the opposition, and they have their passing sequences down to a letter, and spatially, the positional play is some of the best in the world and off the charts. And that, to me, is how Barcelona, we'd hope for them to play. But to sum all of that, I've been really ranty, and I apologize, but there's a lot of feelings, and I try to talk my feelings away. You can ask my therapist, she knows that. So trying to talk it all away. But yeah, my conclusion is that Barcelona need a pivot. That is what they need. I said it on the CBS Sports Galazo show. I say it with full force. And Barcelona know that. They need a pivot. They cannot control a match, and they cannot go forward. It's not even that De Jong is a problem or Pedri's a problem or that this player is a problem or that player is a problem. No. It's that without a pivot, That is a thing that this team is missing, that unless they figure it out, even next year, it's going to be hard. Not even hard to watch, but you're not going to see what this team is capable of, regardless of who the manager is.
At the end of the day, we've had money to spend. Whether you think we spent it wisely or not, that's another question.
Who's debating the other side of that?
No. Because it'd be like, for example, it's because if we had spent some of that money that we knew it was hit or miss, like financially, we don't have that cushion anymore of spending 80, 90. Oh, it's not working out. We just bought Zlatan. Okay, then we'll ship him out. And for 24 million euros the next season and get David Villa. Like, we don't have that luxury anymore. So now it's realistically speaking, because now we can say, oh, let's sell Ferran, let's sell Rafinha, let's sell Frenkie. But how much money can we realistically get for Ferran? I know we spent 55. It's already been 2.5 years. I don't know how much of that transfer has been amortized. I think that's the word in English. In Spanish is amortization, exactly. Same with Rafinha. What Rafinha has been now, well, during the summer, will be 2 years since we signed him. I don't know the amortization for that as well.
He's got 3 more years. Rafinha is till 2027.
No, I know exactly. But what I'm saying is that, like, there's still an amount left. But let's say if we sell him for X amount, but let's say we just break even, for example, like that's what I mean with Ferran, because I don't think we're gonna make any money from Ferran. But saying, hey, if we sell Ferran for 30 or 35, I'm just making an example, I have no idea, then we'll break even on that, and then it's more a matter of like, let's cut our losses with Ferran because he's a sub. With Rafinha, now that he had this amazing tie, hit the cornrows, I don't know what got into him, but it would be smart for Barcelona to sell high on Rafinha right now, capitalize, because I think there's a market for Rafinha, especially in the Prem. So you're going to have to make some decisions. De Jong, we talked about, like, if Frenkie didn't have the salary that he has, we know that he would have been out like this for the most part. So can you convince Frenkie de Jong to leave? Can you convince Rafinha to leave? Ferran to leave? Are you gonna get a good offer for them? Because it's gonna be one of those three, unless you want to talk about Pedri or Araujo. Because you're not selling Lewandowski like to where. Like, let's be realistic. You're not selling Lamine Yamal. You're not getting anything from Gundogan. You got him on a free transfer. You're not selling Gavi. Who else realistically? Balde. Yeah. Are you gonna sell Balde and keep Cancelo? Like, I want people to be realistic, because unless we get a good offer for Ferran, Rafinha, Frenkie, and then on top of that, one thing is getting a good offer. Then the other thing, like you just mentioned a lot of great things about Barcelona, living in Barcelona. And another thing is convincing those players or whatever ex-player, hey, you got to leave. You got to now, hey, we got a good offer from Manchester United, who aren't even in the Europa League. So, like, it's going to be tough, because that's the only way you're going to be able to then try and address that pivot problem that I completely and wholeheartedly agree that unless we get it, it's going to be the same, you know what, next year, trying to control games. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, with all the center back options that Barcelona do have that are a lesser level, as you know, of around Araujo, I think that's why you're hearing the experts. Just it's a numbers game. It's the number of center backs that Barcelona can decently trust, especially with Kubarsi jumping out, and then as well as Koundé being potentially could be playing center back, and with the form that he's been in, even at right back, I think that's why you're hearing the experts say that Araujo, because Araujo is 80 mil, his contract is very reasonable, his salary is very reasonable, and he's going to fetch you 80 million. And you have to, and in theory, he would make more money up front, so it'd be a lot, in theory, easier to convince his agent and his family at this point in his life. I mean, if he takes this loss hard enough, if he puts it on himself, I'm being negative, because I think, to your point, like, I would not want to lose Araujo, but the reason why experts are saying his name is because of all the things that Barca kind of need to push a player out. he fits everything. He checks every single box. Being from Uruguay, like being, non-EU. So unless he got his passport, I don't remember. But I think he actually did get his passport in like year 2 or something. So I don't think he's non-EU. But
I'll say this with Araujo. I didn't want to believe that a few months ago, but there was an interview where they asked him, like, I don't know if it was Sport or Mundo Deportivo. And instead of like just right there, like shutting it down like 1000%,
yeah,
he was very vague. And I was like, whoa. Because obviously we've heard the rumors, the rumblings, Bayern Munich. But I would have been like, come on, that's total BS. But hearing Araujo not be like, just, hey, no way, I'm staying here. And then obviously that doesn't necessarily mean anything because we've seen players in the past say that they're definitely staying and then they end up leaving. But to me, that would be, I know that like numbers wise that makes sense, but I wouldn't to me that would be just an insane thing to do. It would be a complete error because you're banking on, yes, we're gonna get 80 whatever for Araujo, and then you think like there's no certainty that whoever we end up buying with that hypothetical money for that pivot spot will, one, end up working and be good enough for you to say, hey, I don't miss us selling the best center back in the world probably, or like top 3 because of the guy we got as a pivot. Because let's say the guy that we get for that pivot role is not trash, it's not Oriol Romeu, but it's not necessarily worth what, let's say he's a Rafinha in that spot. He's not a bad player, but you go, he's not worth 60 or 70, and then you end up regretting, damn, we sold Araujo, the best center back or top 3 in the world, to get this guy for that pivot spot that we do need. Like, there's nobody's debating that, but he wasn't like his el rendimiento. How do you say that in English? What he ends up giving you. What's that word in English? Rendimiento. I want to say rendimiento en inglés. Performance. So whoever you end up buying for 60, 50, 60, 70, whatever that may be, he's good, but he's not great. And then when you look at the broader picture, you're like, damn, like, was it worth it selling Araujo and what he gave us for this guy who's okay?
Yeah.
He's good.
It's a risk. You're talking structurally, right? And because that's what I'm saying about like the control aspect. You said top 3 because I think as a defender to put out fires behind everybody else, yes, Araujo.
He's number 1.
Yeah.
In that aspect.
Yeah, probably. But looking even back to the PSG, the beginning of that game, where what he can't do on the ball and what he is on the ball is counterintuitive to Barcelona taking control. So they're like, and this is like I'm trying to take it glass half full here, where there is a world where if your pivot is good enough and you have 2 center backs that are able to, like, let's say it is Koundé, and yes, you're missing some height there, and yes, you can't put out those same fires, but now you're able to control the match a bit better. So you don't need Araujo to put out those kind of fires. So that's just like the half glass full part of it, is that maybe you now have 2 center backs that help you control a game, and teams will not be targeting in a press or be targeting him that when he has the ball the way that they do, because that's what Barcelona is. Like, they're a team that wants to play. They want to have their identity be, we're Barcelona, we control the ball and we do these things with it and we play a certain way with positional play. But they don't necessarily have the personnel. Like, again, that's the thing. De Jong has never fit in this way. Araujo, yes, he fits as a amazing individual defender because that's what he is. Like, I'm not detracting from Araujo at all. That's why I said I would love to never sell him and have him become a captain and have him continue to improve on the ball, which he has. Again, first goal is because he's gotten better on the ball, right? So it's like, I would love for him to be 27 and continue to prove that, but it's where Barcelona is right now in this moment. They're in between a rock and a hard place where some of the squad is ready for, we'll say, the next step, and some of it isn't. Some of them are they're still too young. Like, Lamine Yamal's still 16, and he'll be 17 next year. You still have to protect him in a way. Pedri is always injured. You still have to protect him, and he's not like, I trust Pedri so much. Like, I do not get rid of my guy, but also he's missed so much time. He's not developing the way that I would like for him to develop. So the detractors that Pedri has, I get it, because he's not on the field to get any better and improve those things. And Gabi, he was so good in the beginning of this year when I got killed over the summer because I was like, this is what I hope Gabi adds to his game. He's not done everything. And people killed me. They're like, oh, Gabi's perfect. He's amazing. I'm like, no. There's stuff that he can improve on to be better. Then he comes back in the fall, and he does. And of course, I didn't eat crow. I was like, yeah, that's what I wanted to see. And he was amazing. He was great. But now Gabi misses so much part of this year. And of course, it's Gabi. So we really hope that he can come back to, we expect that he'll come back to his best, but it might take a while with those ACL injuries. So be patient with him. He may not be able to improve upon his goals. He might be back to looking like Gabi in, whatever it is, like September, October, but like he may not be able to improve on who he was until next April, or, well, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or 2026. Like, we don't know. Yeah. It's a really tough thing, but we've been talking about the future way too much, Rafa, because I think the last little thing, again, I tried to pivot us, but it's too hard because I actually don't have anything to add about El Clásico. Like, this El Clásico makes it 5 if Barca take the 3 points, and the league is still done. But now it becomes a moral victory, where if Barcelona had won this match today, not to say that El Clásico wouldn't have mattered as much, but it wouldn't have. Like, if you lose the 3 points and you lose a league by 11, I mean, at least they made a semifinal of Champions League, and that's what mattered, right? Exercising those demons, beating the PSG, who I think were the better squad, not over the 2 legs, but just in general. Like, they have a much deeper squad. They're bringing €60 million midfielders off their bench to close out a man. Like, what are we talking about? Of course, they had like a deeper squad. They've got triple the revenue or whatever. I mean, not revenue, but like the triple income to spend. So it's a different game. But this El Clásico, even though the questions about Real Madrid playing extra time today, it's on Sunday, so it doesn't matter. Like, there's so much belief in there, and I don't mean to be pessimistic. People know I tend not to be pessimistic, but Rafa, I am very pessimistic about El Clásico this weekend, because after a 12-game unbeaten streak, I would have hoped that Barca could have, not been the better team, but won 2-1. I'm worried that Barcelona is going to get blown off the field 3-0. That Real Madrid is going to play with a lot of confidence, and Bellingham and Vinny Jr. are going to feast, and it's going
to will, but I'm not pessimistic. And if we're good mentally, which it's a big if, I'll admit, but we're gonna, like, Araujo isn't suspended for that game. Lamine Yamal got taken out minute 30, so he's fresh. Like, I think, yes, there was a big, like,
that's the Lamine Yamal 30 minutes. That is the best silver lining I've heard, Rafa. Congratulations. Yeah.
So he's fresh. And then, but I know the rest of the team, they made yes, we're talking about Madrid playing 120 minutes, but we were playing a man down for 60 minutes. And that also takes a toll on our players. So I don't know. Like, I don't think there's if we don't do what we did in the Super Cup final, like, Xavi doesn't play that suicide high line because against Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Bellingham, because that's exactly what they want to do. Like, if we don't shoot ourselves on the foot, then I think we could win. Whether we're not winning the league, sadly, because that's what, 6 fixtures left with taking this game into account, something like that. But I think we can definitely win if we don't do anything like stupid, like the Super Cup final. Like, I think we can do it. It's just a matter of, like, seeing how tough mentally this team is or isn't. Sadly, I think that this will be a good game to put that to the test, whether this team, in some sort of way, being as young as it is for the most part, is able to show some sign of maturity and put something that was really bad that happened a few days ago, but also have that in mind that, hey, yes, it was really bad, but there's a big asterisk next to it because of a big error by one of our guys. So, hey, look at glass half full. It'll be 11 versus 11, hopefully. And we know we can beat them as long as we don't shoot ourselves on the foot. So I'm going to be positive on this one.
I think you convinced me. It's not hard to convince me to be more positive.
Let's go.
I think what swayed me was the argument that because of the way that Real Madrid will play against Barcelona, and your point about the high line that did remind me of the Spanish Super Cup, if Barcelona take the same tactical approach to Real Madrid of what I saw them play against City today that they took against PSG in the first leg, and they deal with Vinny Jr. the same way they dealt with Mbappe, because again, Koundé is still in amazing form, and you're right, Araujo will be back. So I think if they handle Real Madrid, that game plan, the same way that they handled PSG in that first leg, I think you're right. I think they should be even. And so much of this, because of what I think is tactically in front of them, it's going to come down to mentality. And I think a lot of our questions will be answered. But I think you brought me back to center, that if this team can do all the variables or do the things behind the scenes, I think they do talent-wise have, or game plan-wise. Like, I think they can.
Also, Christensen is back. That, like, I know we didn't even talk about this because some people
didn't talk
like
about
that.
Point.
That is like, we were with, as crazy as that sounds.
No, you're right.
Christensen not being able to play against PSG in that defensive midfield role was a huge, huge loss for us. Mm-hmm. And he'll be able to play against Madrid. So, hey, let's look at the glass half full.
Sure. All right. So thankfully, we were finally positive. It took us almost an hour to be positive. But we got there. So we move on again. We care. We complain because we care. This is what Barcelona, this is what living the Barcelona life is like. So if you want more Barca life, especially in Espanol, Aldamuy Football, wherever you can find him, down in the comments and description below, of course, not in comments, but in the description and the doobly-doo, if you will. And then Twitter, Instagram, that's where you can find both of us as well. My Patreons, thank you as always. Apparently, I learned the lesson Frances should have taught me years ago, and he did. He's always bothering me. The more I remind you that if you sign up for Patreon for as low as $3, you get these shows for free, and it really helps out with the show. Apparently, if I tell people there's a Patreon, people sign up for it. So I really appreciate everybody who's been signing up over the last few weeks. Yeah, it's helped keep me sane in these troubling times. And of course, our closed Facebook group and Discord is how you get into our community that have also, with all this excitement, good or bad, been buzzing. So it's always nice to have community and have people to kind of share your grief with. So Rafa, I appreciate you sharing my grief with you, just like his channel, mine the same. Subscribe, good rating on the podcast apps, always a big help. Most importantly, thanks so much for listening to the show in good times and bad. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barca.